Hi, Ty. Welcome to Fired Up.
Hey, it's great to be here, Morgan.
Well, it's great to have you. Listen, for those that don't know you, perhaps you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ty Tinker. I'm the head of analytics at AdQuick and a data scientist by training. Here to talk about all things out of home measurement.
Yes, that's great. This is see, I didn't even know that you could measure out of home. So I'm really interested in talking about this. But before we dive into the specific details around attribution, etc., let's take a step back. When we think about out of home advertising, what has been the traditional way that companies have measured out of home advertising?
Yeah, it's a great question. Out of home is a traditional channel. It's when you think about measurement or the approach to measurement, it's typically been viewed in a brand format. It's leveraged as a brand play. So in a modern environment, that looks like search lift, studying the amount of site visitors you're receiving, these kind of indicators of a successful campaign that include some more informal or anecdotal feedback. And this is powerful and still used. In fact, even we still use all sorts of different feedback and signals, but fortunately for us, we've found a few ways to get more specific with our conversion tracking, our lift analyses, and our statistical scientific approach to studying. So it's a really short and long way to say it's looked at from every angle of the marketing funnel. But now there's better ways to understand those lower funnel impacts.
So traditionally, someone might do some billboard advertising in a particular metro, and then they would look at, okay, do people in that area, geographic area, are we starting to see more traffic from IP addresses in that area, or more, you called it search lift, more people typing into Google for brand searches, and is anyone saying to the CEO, "Hey, I saw your ad," and making
Yeah.
them feel good about the experience, and that's really the measurement traditionally when we think about billboards along I don't know, the 101 here in the Bay
Yeah,
Area.
that's exactly right. I call it the warm and fuzzy. It's
Yeah.
incredibly important because you are trying to influence decision makers, especially in a B2B space. When B2B companies come to us looking for billboard advertising, they want some indicator of success. And a lot of the times it's just, did I have an increase in attendees to my conference? Did I get an email from a CEO I've been trying to attract? Those kinds of indicators are very real, very important, incredibly hard to measure, especially at scale.
Yeah, in terms of measuring that at scale, I mean, does it sometimes raise questions that a lot of brands can't answer? And, how are you dealing with those challenges?
Yeah, help me understand questions that they can't answer. There's a lot of questions. Just if you don't mind adding a bit of specificity.
Sure. So maybe they want some more granularity than, just it's been seen by a group of people. Maybe they want to know, hey, is it the folks that, we're trying to reach in particular, right? A lot of times there might be a belief that it's not really moving the needle as far as their goals.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. There are some challenges. I think when we approach out of home measurement, it's focused on incrementality. So there's kind of two steps. The first is, did the out of home have an impact, or are we measuring some, metric of success, whether that's a lift in the search volume, as mentioned before, website visitors within this geo. But then we take a look at, all right, what would have happened anyways as a result of
Right.
organic brand knowledge? Let's say you're a major out of home advertiser, think Apple, think Coca-Cola, and everybody knows who you are. But what is the incrementality that we can draw out of using an out of home campaign as a strategic play and a part of your marketing mix? And so the challenge is not really, asking, did out of home, did it do something, because everybody talks about it, and it, depending on your scale and as long as you're reaching levels of saturation, you're going to be noticed. But is it driving the events that you're seeking to drive? And that's kind of where our measurement tools come in. AdQuick provides planning and execution, connecting a lot of the hard to connect data points that exist in the billboard industry and the out-of-home industry, and therefore we have a pretty good view on whether or not something would have happened. And then, of course, we can say with confidence whether or not it did happen, whether that was incremental. Did you incur more sales? Did you cause a lift in website signups or high funnel? Did you see a lift in website visitors that wouldn't have occurred without that market level intervention? Hopefully that gets at your question. I went a little far there, but hopefully that answers it.
Right. And I guess traditionally the challenge is you've got to kind of remove the other marketing efforts that the company is doing. So, yeah, we had a lot more visits to the website, but we had that trade show. We also were running a huge email marketing campaign. So you've got to run some kind of regression analysis to remove what you think the impact of those things might have been, and in order to sort of isolate the impact of a billboard, or hey, around this particular airport, or we're running this bus advertising, in this particular city. There could have been a big event in that city. So, what was the trade show that was in the Moscone, and what was the adverts around San Diego that you were running at the same time?
Right, exactly. It's about stripping down. It's about stratification. It's about segmenting out. All right, here's our control markets. Here's our test markets. That's hard to do sometimes for brands, especially with a massive marketing mix. And a lot of the times, out-of-home isn't the first channel that you think of when you're going to market.
What do you think is the way that they should think about when they go to market, when they're considering, okay, is out-of-home one of the things that I should use? Is it one of the leading edges of my marketing campaign? How do you help them decide that?
Yeah, out-of-home has a lot of staying power. I think that's what attracts brands, especially in the B2B space. It's a way to say we're here, we're not going anywhere. I live in Salt Lake City and see a number of tech companies who are establishing billboards all up and down I-15 on the way to the Silicon Slopes, as we lovingly call them. There's a growing kind of tech population here. So establishing yourself and then proving to kind of your cohort or your demo or geo that you exist and you're not going anywhere is kind of what is the first initial step and reasoning behind putting up a billboard. There's also some really important organic aspects as well, which we can dive into.
Yeah, and so we had Rick Robinson on from PJX Media on the show earlier, and he called that kind of advertising proof of life advertising. Right, you're not necessarily trying to get attribution from there in terms of sales impact, but you're just trying to say, hey, we're here, and it's a statement of intent, and maybe it helps with recruitment, maybe it helps make the VCs that funded the company feel better, and maybe it helps the general staff sort of a lift in morale, because look, we're spending on this and we matter and we're important. But you can't really measure that easily if it's just that sort of one billboard or a two billboard, because it's not part of a big campaign. It is, by its very nature, a sort of softer proof of life kind of program.
Yeah, you're right across the board. It's not scientific per se. You don't have a control set and a test set, but it depends on your indicators. I'm all about statistical significance, proving that there was some sort of causal effect. But if you want to explore the option of establishing your brand and making sure that you have that, just that kind of initial connection to a market in a very creative, almost stage-like play, I think it's a phenomenal idea. And there are ways to approach measurement for that. It's not going to be easy. What's easy is running, a multi-million-dollar, if not tens of millions of dollars in ad spend across thousands of units across the US. That's easy for me. When I hear about a campaign of that nature, where there's, 3,000 billboards booked across 35 different cities. That makes my life a breeze, because then we can start to establish who the control and test are. The challenges start to introduce themselves when you don't have that scale, but there are some really good planning aspects and measurement tools that you have available in your arsenal that look a little bit different than, let's say, a causal impact analysis.
Right. So for smaller companies, right. So you're talking about Apple, Coca-Cola. They're advertising everywhere, and you're gonna feel the. In fact, they're almost advertising constantly. So it's more switching it off that creates the measurement. But if I'm a startup, right, I have limited budget, but I'm trying to target C-suite people. So I'm gonna go. I don't know. I'm gonna do ads at SFO, and I'm going to maybe do some ads in Reagan Airport in DC and maybe in New York City. Like, I'm literally going to target airports. I've got a much smaller program there, but measurement is really important to me, right? Because I've got to justify this ad spend. There are lots of other things I could do with the money. Traditionally, that's been this anecdotal almost, as we say, but you guys have worked out a different way of doing it. Tell me in that kind of instance how that might work.
Yeah, I'm going to take a step back and speak to a little bit about what AdQuick is and kind of was the reason it came into existence for the out-of-home space, if that's okay. So out-of-home, notoriously fragmented, notoriously difficult to execute. Planning had to occur months in advance, like 6 to 12 months in advance, and notoriously expensive. What AdQuick stepped in to do is try and be a central platform or resource for all of the metadata and all of the planning and execution tools that you would need to book a billboard campaign. There are 1,500 media owners in the U.S. That makes it really difficult if you're trying to plan maybe even an airport campaign to source this inventory, make sure that the creative is approved, and actually get it executed. And then your last thought is measurement, right? It's usually an afterthought. That's the major challenge here. AdQuick tried to make it easy. They're doing a great job. We're doing a great job in establishing a central resource to quickly explore, plan, test creatives, get some advice, and set up measurement in advance. So the measurement step wasn't even considered in the past, where it used to be, like I was mentioning prior, kind of a brand experiment. But now measurement is so critical. The challenge here is it doesn't necessarily come from the marketing team. The measurement expectations, those are coming from different sources within a business, right? You want results. Those results are expected to meet a certain threshold by a finance team, or they're expected to have some statistically significant impact on conversion rates coming from your data team. It's not necessarily the marketing team that's asking some of these tough to answer questions, but they're so important to the business, and especially at a small scale. So that was the intro
right
to what is now the measurement approach. Isn't that hard to kind of set up or process. It really depends on what your objectives are. If you're trying to reach as many eyeballs as possible, then you just set a low CPM. You purchase units that have the most amount of reach possible. You can plan multiple units that start to maximize your reach metrics while still minimizing your budgets. There are some approaches there. Be happy to dive into some of those.
Yeah, so how does that work? Many years ago. How do you do it now?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways, especially when it comes to planning. The industry depends on a trade org called Geopath, who kind of does the research on impressions and movement data for all both static and digital units. This can also include more unique billboard placements or creative placements like wild postings, gas station TVs. They kind of set the impression counts for the industry, and then that gives us a great idea of the amount of reach that we're going to get, so the total number of impressions and the frequency as well, so the amount of times an individual will be exposed to a particular ad unit. That's on the planning side. There's a bit of a challenge with that. Planning is, at least for traditionally booked out of home, is set up in 4-week increments. So there's a lack of granularity at the daily level that can only be achieved by leveraging mobile device samples. So we collect kind of mobile device data to try and understand the volume of individuals who have cell phones and opt in to anonymized location data to understand how many folks were near an ad unit while an ad was live. If that's digital, that means the creative was actually playing, and on a rotating schedule, it was their time slot, an advertiser's time slot that was playing. For traditional units, generally 24/7, depending on the time of day. And for programmatic digital units, that can include a whole number of other factors. So whether or not there's certain weather events or whether or not a screen went down, all of this plays into the daily mobile location data that is so critical to understanding who actually was exposed to your campaign.
So that gives us a good sense of how you calculate impressions more accurately than we've been able to do before. Give us another kind of few tips on how we get into that attribution question there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a fairly straightforward process. Basically, if you start with your out-of-home billboard data set, so all of the units that you can choose from, you select a few that you want to run for a campaign, and then you establish a kind of a view shed around those units, understanding where they're facing, how large they are, how many folks can see them. Then you can map that or index it against mobile location data and understand on a sample basis, we see that there's several thousand devices within a certain vicinity of an ad unit, and then you can start to understand not the total population necessarily. It's really hard to gauge the total volume of impressions that occurred, but you can start to understand how that volume of impressions changed day to day. And for marketers, that unlocks almost just about everything that they would need to successfully run a experiment where out of home is the test subject and you're trying to prove that it was effective or did something. You really only need a sample. You don't need the complete population. And in fact, all of our data that we leverage is opt-in and anonymized. So there's simply the challenge, I guess, but the reality is we don't work with deterministic data. We don't have 100% coverage. We're working with a sample, and that sample needs to tell us some things about the performance of the unit, the impact it had on the website or conversion data, and then, of course, bottom line, the revenue that it drove.
Sure, I would imagine the timing of those impressions correlating with the timing of other marketing activities help you figure out who the one that got us that new customer.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
So is it, Morgan talked about it before. We're not just talking about what you drive past, right? We're talking about what you walk past. Maybe you start to mention some of the other digital properties that are starting to become part of the portfolio. So tell us a little bit more about what that looks like now, like what our world looks like with this sort of ability to display digital ads, and how that might change when we start thinking about vehicles being part of the mix as well.
Great question. Vehicles are absolutely a part of the mix. Certainly one of the most exciting pieces of out-of-home inventory that an advertiser can take advantage of. When we think about all of the different media types, it's interesting. So I sit on a TradeOrg's analytics unit, and we talk about the taxonomy of out-of-home and naming all of these different media types that exist. And it's an impossible kind of question and challenge to name everything that is considered out-of-home. But once you start to abstract a little bit, you have your digital screens, your static screens, and then you have some moving media, which can be a mix of both. That includes planes, trains, taxi toppers, full car wraps. I saw a company wrapping the new Cybertrucks. All of it exists, and it all can be measured. In fact, there's kind of two sides to the measurement discussion when it comes to mobile media. The first is, okay, we can study it at a geo level if we had 100, let's say, Uber cars driving around the Lower East Side during a specific event or conference or something, and they all shared the same branding. What APIs or indicators can we study that may have had a lift without needing to track the actual mobile location data of the individuals who were exposed? What is the causal or the effect of that deployment? And that's been studied for forever, and there's very new advanced approaches when it comes to mixed media modeling and causal inference that are coming out of some great research from Google and Meta. That's been done, though. The attribution piece is a bit more challenging, but really it comes down to knowing the location of the unit, the size of the viewshed. So how far can we reasonably estimate that someone was able to see the ad from a distance? And then, of course, that time parameter. Where were they? When were they there? Was the unit moving, etc.? And that's all available. In fact, it's readily available. It's just a less accurate model than throwing up a billboard on the 101 and studying who drives by. That's pretty straightforward.
So the next time I'm on the beach and I see an airplane fly by with a banner, I know someone is counting that I can see that.
Maybe we haven't figured out the third dimension yet, but hopefully, I mean, there's some stronger ways to measure whether or not that banner was a success, I will say, than really trying to be deterministic when it comes to those more difficult to measure. I think of the sphere in Vegas. You can see that from an airplane. How do we count those people? Well, maybe we stop trying to count every single person at a device level and start trying to really study the lower funnel metrics that we want to be impacting with that particular activation.
Sounds pretty familiar, thinking about newspapers 30 years ago and how things have changed quite a bit.
Changed a little bit. So just to recap, there is a third party, I think you call them GoPath, who has the data about impressions. It is sort of the standard for, okay, this billboard has this many generalized impressions, this airport ad, the little screens you mentioned at gas stations. So, that data exists, and you cross-correlate that with, okay, mobile phone, cell phone data that says, okay, but actually nobody this is the number of people that walked past that day because it was raining or it was cold, and so we can kind of get some variance there, and you use the variance in that, correlating those two things to then say, okay, this billboard was down. It's a digital billboard. It was down for these 3 days. What difference did that actually make on whatever we're measuring, website visits, let's say? And so you use that as part of the model. The variance is there as part of the model to sort of demonstrate the impact of any given ad. And so that sort of, it's not a question of, hey, I need to run this in New York and San Francisco and then turn it off and turn it on. You're using variances within the actual campaign based on weather, based on just generalized traffic, based on whether the ad was working or not, to build up the A/B tests, if I want to use that A/B test to sort of prove out, okay, this particular ad had this impact. Do I have that right? And then we can kind of measure down from there because we've got our generalized attribution. Platform.
Yeah, I would add some just a bit of clarification, but that's absolutely the right direction. GeoPath is just a ratings agency for the out-of-home industry, so they don't give us like mobile location data. They're just kind of helping with planning and impressions, that kind of thing, and then CPMs are set by the media owners. We as a platform aggregate all of that data into one place to help with planning. For the measurement side, it's we have visibility into samples of mobile location data, which is real-time-ish. It's on an imposed delay to prevent real-time tracking. We don't need it. It's not necessary because we're not trying to do instant retargeting with static units out in the world. Like, we're not trying to get a team of workers out to deploy a bus route in 3 minutes because someone's walking up the street. Like, that's not our objective. It's really similar kinds of impacts and similar kinds of studies, but the idea here is enabling okay, we want to track website performance. Did we see a specific lift in web conversions that were coming from one unit over another? So we can do that A/B test, compare and contrast. Did that unit have a different creative? Did it run at a different time of day? Is it digital? Like very simple things. Is it in Philadelphia versus New York? Those kinds of questions are answered. And then the really interesting piece is once we have that mobile location kind of data connection, we can also start to study what audiences were driving the performance. So it's segmenting across geo, so like the location of a unit, and then also what are the defining characteristics of the lat long, the location of that billboard? What are the psychographics and demographics of the people walking by? And that's where I think the most value can be found, especially at small scale.
Okay. All right. So we have the cell phone data, the mobile data that sort of tells us the location, but it also has some generalized persona-based, demographics that you can use to kind of go, okay, this has a lot of high net worth people walking past, and they also came to the website, and so therefore this demographic, or younger age group, or what have you. So do you need then a certain volume of ad spend? Like you need to, in order to test this accurately, you need a certain volume of inventory and a certain volume of website traffic normally to kind of be able to get those sample sizes and make them accurate. Or could a smaller B2B startup just running a tight campaign also be able to measure this kind of thing?
Yeah. You can plan, regardless of scale, to target specific individuals and audience segments, which I highly recommend. It is difficult to measure success within those segments because as soon as you start stripping away those populations and going down to a small sample, you're going to struggle. So if you're trying to reach, let's say, a specific politician, it's going to be really hard to know whether or not that person saw your ad or not. There are other strategic plays or creative work that you can do, but from a measurement perspective, much more challenging to think about that one-to-one connection. So you'll need some other inputs in your planning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you do need a certain threshold of audience size in order to be able to get some proper attribution, statistically valid attribution here to kind of go, okay, this ad definitely drove this kind of demographic to the site, because otherwise you're sort of measuring 5 clicks and it's just too small to make any, to be able to see it. Frankly, it could just be.
Yeah. If your approach is trying to drive, stat sig and a huge lift in a specific audience, going to be very difficult to prove that out with, a statistical test. It doesn't mean the tools aren't available, and there is some really interesting benchmarking that you can leverage to try and improve your targeting. And I think what's really interesting here is, although we work with massive billion-dollar brands, publicly traded companies who are running these really scaled campaigns, those campaigns have enabled us to do kind of back research and back studies of their drivers of true performance behind their campaign. What we found was the major driver behind an increase in conversions on a website that were connected to out-of-home, long-winded hypothesis there, but that the primary driver was not necessarily geo as much as it was the audiences that you were targeting. Very simply, if you're a car e-commerce company who's looking to try and increase the number of visitors to your website, the best thing you can do is target car shoppers. It's almost so obvious that it's like, how is this not being done prior? But that's the kind of research that we have enabled. And that applies even at a small scale, because you're influencing your likelihood to increase the conversion rates by targeting a single unit and picking one over another because it reflects the audience that you're targeting, or because the unit sits within a highly saturated environment full of the audience that you're targeting. And that level of audience the audience-based planning can be done at basically at the most precise scale there is, which is lat long. Like, we know exactly who kind of what kind of demos are within a certain vicinity. So if you have a decent idea of what those are, maybe via digital, where there's more a higher scale of deterministic tracking and audience information, you can bring that to out of home, pair your marketing efforts, and then you just study the down funnel effects. Let's look at, number of signups. Let's look at if XYZ CMOs reached out and wanted to sign up for our platform. That kind of thing can still be studied, and the planning exists. If you run a scaled attribution study and project and you're expecting tens of thousands of data points, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge, and there's probably better approaches.
Forgive me if I'm asking this question wrong, but is what you're saying, okay, I'm a car manufacturer, I want to sell more of my, let's just pick a family SUV. Are you saying that what we should be doing, or what we might do in that case, is look at the places where that match up with families that are in the economic categories to buy that SUV? Or are you also saying, and maybe it's both, in that particular town, everyone who's on their way to look at cars has to drive down a certain highway where there are 7 dealerships, and so maybe on a few exits before that's the time to show the family SUV. Which one were you talking about?
Yeah, I think number one. Number two is it's not new necessarily, especially among auto dealers who have kind of figured this whole equation out pretty early on. And of course, it makes sense. You generally see roadside billboards when you're in a car, so that's a pretty clear correlation. But number one is possible, recognizing the certain demographics that may be successful in other channels and bringing those to out of home. The reason I kind of talk about it in that way, where you're kind of going from digital to offline, which scares some people sometimes, but then they realize there's digital ways to buy offline inventory. The thought process there is you already generally know who's responding to your online campaigns, whether that's as simple as a census demographic or age group, or whether as precise as a credit reporting data set that you've indexed against your converting audience and you've surveyed these people, you have a panel existing, you generally know who you're working with. All of that is targetable with out of home. And in fact, with programmatic digital, you can activate that almost same day, where you say, okay, we know what the heat map of people we're trying to reach looks like. We know they're, at certain bars in Miami or whatever it may be. You can activate that almost same day, which is some of the more incredible technical advances in the out-of-home space in the recent decades.
Right. So it sounds like a big innovation here that you're bringing is the ability to do that upfront planning to target those specific audiences. And there is a downstream attribution and measurement impact, of course, as well. But I mean, I know I've spoken to a lot of companies who have said, hey, we want to do out of home. And you go, okay, great. And traditionally you have to say, okay, we'll try to find out. Let's do something on the 101. Okay, how much are they? I don't know, $40,000 a month. And they often, they go, okay, great. And they come up to it and then they just, frankly, they say, okay, look, I don't want to spend X $100,000 on this. And then they stop, right? They go abandon it, and it falls into the sort of, it's going to take too long and it's too hard and it was an afterthought or whatever. But now they can actually say, okay, I know that these demos, these particular personas, these particular demographics convert highly from my ad campaigns, because I'm doing Google ads and display, etc., and I'm already running a ton of those. That I'm doing that well. I can use those audiences. I can look at your data and your planning, because you've taken that public data and you've cross-correlated it with this mobile data, and you've looked at what the big brands are doing. You can see what converts, because you can provide some benchmarks there. And so smaller companies can take advantage of that and just sort of put their toe in the water there and kind of go, okay, I'm just going to run on a digital thing. I'm not committing to multi-month spend here. I'm just going to run this as a test, and actually they'll be able to see the impact of that pretty quickly. So it then widens up the aperture of the types of companies that could do this and should be doing it in the future. Okay.
Yes, and the great last piece here is with opt-in mobile location data, you can continue to retarget down funnel. So if you are working with a set of exposures from a single unit, you can continue to try and reach those individuals across your digital channels and your kind of standard digital approach, where there is that more instant response. You're looking for that more rapid activation or sign up or whatever it may be. You can continue to retarget an out-of-home exposed audience, and we've seen a lot higher success rates with conversion data among those exposed audiences, which is no surprise again, but able to be studied now.
Oh, right. Okay. So you can run a brand campaign. I'm running a brand campaign, and I'm building a retargeting audience based on people who we know who have seen that ad because they walked past it or they drove past it or what have you. And and that's becoming an audience, and I can take that audience and then put it into my other ad programs as a target audience, and then push them on desktop or mobile with digital ads to convert them, because here's a performance, like here's an offer or something else that can move them down the
something
funnel.
Yeah, right. Some similar creative or connection. Highly recommend pairing creatives. It's such an effective way to continue keeping your brand top of mind. And for the companies I see here in Salt Lake, the time to conversion is a year. It's a long sales cycle with a lot of touch points along the way, but keeping that impressive creative with the backdrop of the mountains, you're always on, always there. They're going to be thinking of you first, as opposed to just trying to target on some of those digital channels. So pairing is super effective.
Right. And so, for example, a lot of startups go to conferences and they go, okay, there's a conference in Las Vegas. We're going to run some geofence digital ads. I'm also going to run some out-of-home stuff there. And I can build an audience from the people who saw my out-of-home and retargeted them afterwards once they've flown home to New York or wherever they've come in from. And I can still follow that audience to kind of amplify the impact of my out-of-home at the convention center that we had in Vegas, as an example of the type of campaign that you could do.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. We have a lot of conference related campaigns.
Well, that's pretty cool, but it also starts to feel like, whoa, that's a lot that you know about people. You talked about opt-ins. You talked about how this is part of networks that they've already opted into, but can you talk to us a little bit about privacy and the protocols that surround it?
Yeah, I think so. First off, our mobile location data is all opt-in, anonymized. We work with mobile ad IDs, which are anonymized device connectors. They are not IP addresses, not cell phone numbers. The other big thing here is, and the reason that I'm a data scientist more than a programmer, is we're working with samples of data here, where this is a group of individuals who have opted in to receiving or tracking mobile location for any number of reasons. That could be a retail focus using weather-based map apps, etc., that want to share this data, or at least have opted into sharing this data with advertisers, who then can provide them with a set of specified ads that are relevant to what they do. Out of home is the least aggressive of the channels in terms of specificity. It is low touch points. It's not stopping you from watching a video. It's not interrupting your day. It's just kind of simply there and highly visible and can be very exciting, etc. And there is great ways to index samples of audiences who have opted into this mobile location data against existing audience segments. So if you're a car shopper, if you're interested in, specific type of clothes or chairs or whatever, there are ways to index against that data. But again, you're not working with the 100% of the population. You're just working with that sample. So there are some assumptions that have to be made. And there's also some privacy that needs to be, consumer privacy that needs to be brought into play. All of this is probabilistic. It is a method of approaching an audience, trying to put yourself in the right place at the right time. But again, we're working with a little bit slower of a channel here, where it can take sometimes more than a day to set up a campaign, right? So the targeting is a feature, but there are much clearer and more effective ways to approach the targeting piece, but also just matching your creative against an audience that's likely to respond.
So we often talk about AI, and I wondered how AI was impacting out-of-home measurement. Is it in fact a lot of the machine learning? You're a data scientist, so is it a lot of the machine learning that is in fact unlocking the sort of correlation causation here, and the regression analysis to remove other marketing programs? Is it fundamentally AI that's opened up this capability, or how is it impacting it?
Yeah, that's a great question. AI is a phenomenal tool, or at least generative AI, kind of what we're thinking of when we think about what is exciting and popular, is incredible for creative. It has an amazing impact on our ability to generate and respond, or have a generative AI respond to an effective creative placement and build on top of that. When we think about our tools for experimentation and testing the effectiveness of an ad campaign and also helping that influence future performance, we're working with machine learning here, which some of those tools have been around for upwards of a decade, if not more. They're just accessible and easy to implement into a data pipeline. So some of the ML tools that we're using, the predictive ML, it's been around a bit longer, whereas the AI, I think, has incredible impacts on copy, creative, understanding audience data, trying to parse through, how can we turn a brief or a brand strategy with an out-of-home campaign into an audience, and then how can we reach that audience? So it's AI, it's ML, they're working together. They're, one term may be more popular than the other, but both are effective in driving incrementality among these campaigns.
What do you think's next? AI isn't all that new to your field, or at least machine learning is it? So what's the new thing that's coming?
Yeah, I think what's really exciting in the space and real is the layering audience targeting piece. I think there's incredible value here. We've studied it, we've researched it, and not to continue to go kind of back to this point, but I think the possibilities of both audience targeting, but also understanding the true reach and frequency of campaigns is something that we're finally kind of unlocking and figuring out how it influences performance. So that's what's exciting to me, but I'm a big time data nerd. I love the ideas behind some of these like explosive and eye-catching creatives as well. But I'm thinking, all right, what's the organic impact on web? Right, like that's where my mind goes, as opposed to some of the other kind of more exciting things. But there are some really, really neat things happening in creative. I completely encourage folks to just take a look at some of the neat new pieces of inventory available in out-of-home.
Well, I think, as marketers, what's more exciting than create entire television shows to group people together and be able to think of them as a group, right? The idea that a single billboard can do the same thing. And I think back to the Magicist billboard in Chicago, which is an old school billboard that was there for years and years and years. And when you drove downtown, you always saw it. Everybody my age from Chicago knows exactly what I'm talking about. And that audience existed for years without an ability to measure it. And it still exists. So it's pretty cool to finally get your tech stuff on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting. Out of home is an ancient channel, but being able to measure it is not so old. So it's exciting.
Do you have any final thoughts or advice for startups as they're thinking about out of home advertising in the coming year?
Yeah. I definitely do. We've worked with some startups. Out of home is an experiment. You have the tools to test it, and it should be run as such. You can set it up. I saw an incredible creative from StatSig, shouting them out. They ran a creative on a billboard as an experiment. I think all startups should be doing the same, testing whether or not there's kind of an increase in these response indicators. Do your kind of standard there. Startups should absolutely be leveraging out of home. I think they should view it as an experiment rather than as a way to push brand at first. And with the audience data that's available and the capabilities behind some of these platforms that are powering the out-of-home and general marketing ecosystems, you have the ability both to retarget and to measure the effectiveness of channel, both on your lower funnel metrics and on your other channels. Run it as an experiment, set up your hypothesis ahead of time, and make it go live. It'll be really interesting to see some of the results, and I can tell you we've seen some serious success. Yeah.
Right. I really do think that the attribution part here, the ability to plan and target particular audiences, and then the ability to close and sort of do the attribution here, will open up more brands to experimenting with out of home an earlier stage, because you can measure it now, and you should. So yeah. I think that's really exciting. So I totally agree with you. Our next section is called Fired Up 5, and this is our quick fire round. So take it away, Ian.
Yes, quick answers, no long responses allowed. Obviously, you're a data scientist. We could hear it throughout our conversation. But what would you do if you weren't combining data science and marketing?
I would probably be snowboarding all over the U.S. and enjoying all the beauty here in the great U.S. of A. I would be doing something on my feet and something dangerous that my mom wouldn't be happy about.
Yeah, X Games participant. What is the best career advice you've ever been given?
Yeah, my first boss out of my grad program hired me, and the day before he told me I got the job, he said the most important thing you can do is find a reason to wake up in the morning and be excited to do cool shit. So I don't know if we're allowed to curse on the podcast. I can run that back, but that is the most sticky advice I've received. Just wake up and continue to do that.
That's good.
Yeah, I love Peter Attia's book, Outlive. It is a phenomenal overview of how to, how to improve some of the aspects of your life, including diet, physical health, etc. It's had a great impact on the way I've lived my own life. So I recommend that all the time. I think it is a wonderful book for anybody to read, regardless of what your goals are.
I know it's probably not pasting a billboard above a busy highway. What's the strangest job you've ever done?
I was a middle school DJ. I played music for middle school dances for a little bit in college, and I was terrible. I always had something go wrong with it, but that's the strangest.
Fantastic. We talked a little bit about what's exciting in your space, but what are you most excited for in 2024?
Most excited for in 2024? Outside of the space, I'm incredibly thrilled for AI to find its kind of place in both our marketing ecosystem, but even beyond as it continues to influence decision making. I'm excited to see where policy lands on it. AI is it's a very thrilling space. So excited to see kind of how it fits in as the big newcomer for the past couple of years.
So Ty Tinker is the head of analytics at AdQuick, which is a platform for planning, executing, and measuring out-of-home advertising campaigns. Ty, thanks for joining us here on Fired Up. Really enjoyed our conversation today. But for people who want to reach out to you, where should they go?
Yeah, find AdQuick at adquick.com. You can reach out to me and connect with me on LinkedIn. That's my handle is Ty Tinker, Tytinker. Just feel free to reach out. Let's chat data.
Wonderful. Listen, Ty, thanks for your time today, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks again, Morgan. Thanks, Ian.